Alrighty. And number 5, you are going to pick the one intervention that you have found in the literature that you feel best addresses this social issue from a social work perspective. And my example with depression as a social issue, I've decided to go with the humanistic perspective and to look at the findings of a research study that was done on interpersonal therapy, which was explained briefly in my previous videos. You also will find some links and the resources on the reflection project tab on Moodle. So I'm going to show you the article that I have picked. But before that, I want you to think about, how do you find articles? There are some resources on Moodle that I want to introduce you to. So on the Reflection Project tab, in the resources section, there is a page with the depression example resources. And then if you scroll down, you'll also see LSU Libraries Information Literacy Tutorials. These are each about 30 minutes to an hour long, and they walk you through the steps of using the databases at LSU. That is going to be your best source for finding peer-reviewed journal articles for this project. So if you're not familiar with that, I highly recommend that you take some time to go through these modules before you start searching for your articles. Also, if you are someone that feels perhaps intimidated by research or is feeling a little unsure about research, that is okay. That's a pretty normal way to be feeling at this point in your MSW program. And these modules will help you to feel more comfortable. In this class, since it's not a research class, we're not as focused on the nitty gritty details when we're going to be evaluating this article. We'll use the questions that are provided in the textbook for analyzing research. And that is in the same figure that we've already looked at in Exhibit 1.7. In addition to criteria for evaluating theory, now they also have criteria for evaluating research. So I'm going to show you the article that I'm going to choose to use with my depression example. I found this 2016 article that is a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a type of study that pools the findings of other studies and to make broader, more general statements about usually the effectiveness of an intervention. So instead of the researchers collecting their own data, recruiting their own participants, the data in this study is the descriptive statistics from other individual articles. What happens is all of those are pulled together to figure out, across these samples, across different researchers, what do we know about how effective this intervention is. And meta-analyses are very strong and rigorous because they do take into effect um, all of the research that's on this, and it's also quantitative. So there are actual statistical analyses that can be done to really analyze the data across studies, whereas there are other narrative approaches, but those are more descriptive, they can be more rich, but they also don't give us that numerical value that can be important for comparing. So this is a meta-analysis of all of the studies to date on interpersonal psychotherapy. And for meta-analyses, they will have a specific procedure usually where they talk about what kind of key terms they use to look for articles and to find out about other studies. If you look right here at the abstract, you'll see that there were 90 studies and over 11,000 participants, and that it was for acute phase depression, so whenever someone was in a major depressive episode, and that they found across these 90 studies and 11,000 participants that there were moderate to large effects compared to groups of people who didn't get the intervention. So that's pretty significant. There also was no difference found with other therapies and with um, pharmacological therapy, which is psychiatric medication. And combined treatment was more effective than just IPT alone. So that is the general findings of this. So let's look at these questions. So corroboration, this is referring to, are the research findings from the study something that other researchers agree with? And I'd say for a meta-analysis, it's pretty strong with corroboration because you're pooling all of that data together from different researchers. Multidimensionality, again, because of the meta-analysis design of this study, I would say that it's pretty strong, that there are lots of different groups and across a lot of different types of settings. Then you're going to be looking at definition of terms. So looking in the article, usually at the end of the literature review, they will define terms. So if we were thinking about depression, then in this article, it should be clearly defined what depression is. It clearly defines what IPT is. That's what we're going to want to look for. And my criticism of this is that it doesn't talk much about what depression is, but that could be an artifact of publishing requirements rather than the authors. A lot of times people are crunched for space whenever they're publishing an article, and sometimes things have to be cut. Influence of the setting. So in this case with the meta-analysis, it is really the influence of having many settings that it might be hard to differentiate if there are setting effects. The influence of the researcher. So does the researcher acknowledge the role that they have? And even if not, for you to think, how might the researcher have influence the presentation of the results? So, for example, if I look at this article that I found, in quantitative research, it's very unusual for you to find a study where researchers talk about their own influence. It's much more common in qualitative studies. there is a concept in qualitative research that is called reflexivity, and that's exactly what it is. Thinking about the researcher's um, effect on the research process based on the researcher's values um, and ideas. So another way to analyze this is to look at who the authors are. There's usually like an author note. Sometimes it's around here. Sometimes you have to go down to the bottom of the article. Um, Sometimes it is right after the text. So that's where it is in this article. And we know that this is from the Netherlands. So that's something I should think about. I need to make sure that these articles are international. So I'd want to go back and look and make sure that these aren't all in Amsterdam, because that might be different. Their findings might be different than a meta analysis of articles done on depressed people in America. All right, so they're at this university. They are in Europe. Oh, we see some New York, Canada, North America. So maybe this is an international. That makes it even more credible because it has such diversity here. Um, Also, you'll see where they disclosed any kind of conflict of interest, and Dr. Koljapers does receive royalties from a publisher on this topic and speaker fees. So this is something to think about. How does all of this support um, impact how they present their results? If they're getting lots of grant money and speakers fees to do this, they want their stuff to be pretty impressive. And so maybe that might influence the results here. But because they have disclosed this, it shows transparency. And that is really what is most important in research ethics. All right, let's get back to our questions. Social distance. So, did the researcher attempt to minimize errors that could have been because of language differences, cultural differences, specification of inferences? So, whenever, especially in the discussion section, whenever a researcher makes a claim, is it inference that is unbiased and objective? And then lastly, think about the suitability of measures. And research measures are how we measure a concept. So, for example, in my article, I would want to see some sort of discussion about what um, diagnostic tools were used in these articles to diagnose people with depression. We want that to be kind of consistent, because if they're using different standards across the different studies, then we aren't comparing the same things anymore. And usually you can find that out in an article by looking in the methods section. And because this is a meta-analysis, it may show up in a different spot. But usually in a straightforward study, which your study that you pick for your intervention may not be a meta-analysis. It might be um, a random control trial where it's testing the intervention. It might be a pre-experimental study where it is piloting a new intervention, where there is just a pre and a post test in one group. And that's fine. And that'll be part of your discussion.